Hello. Hi, humans. How are you doing? Yeah? I don't hear any yells. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, emotion, feelings. Hello, I'm Kat. Ooh, whoa. What's going on there, Google? I knew something weird was going to happen with this. Let's see. Why didn't it work before? Oh, it's on your end. Okay. Well, I'm not going to worry about that then. Cool. So, hi, I'm Kat. I work as a senior product designer at Etsy. So, if you're interested in working at Etsy, definitely hit me up. Whoa, this is magical. I'm so happy about this. This is really fun. Oh, yeah, it's happening right now. I love it. This is how karaoke works. So if you didn't know, this is a karaoke presentation. Just kidding. So I get to work at a really cool place where I can do side projects like making games, which is part of why I'm here. So in my spare time, I actually make video games, and I also organize events and make other cool things like comics. So I run I'm part of the organizing group of what's called the Game Devs of Color Expo, and it actually just happened this past July, and we actually show off lots of really cool games by people of color from around the world, and of course all people are invited. So if you're interested, definitely go to the gamedevsofcolorexpo.com, because we're going to have some cool stuff going on next year. So today what I want to discuss is my game SweetXheart, and I'm going to be talking about how I programmed it, as well as lessons learned for finishing a project, especially a side project. But first, should I try unplugging and replug? Let's do it. Sometimes. Right? Like literally just turn everything off and back on. Okay, so let's see if I just like, wait, oh, that still looks confused. Heck yeah, I love it. Well, that's part of the way better. I wonder what's going on there. I don't know what to do. Well, I might as well actually, okay, so firstly, I'm going to be talking about my game SweetXheart. I'm going to talk about how I programmed it, and I'm going to talk about lessons learned for finishing a project, especially a side project. And now seems like a really good time to give a slight content warning. So I talk about catcalling and street harassment, so like not like it's not like super talking about abuse or anything like that, but there are some curse words. There are some words that are gendered and abusive. So if this is something that is triggering to you and might cause you to feel or like rehash some PTSD, for example, don't relive the trauma, because that sucks. But I'm not going to bring that up for a little bit, and obviously we're having slide fun right now, so you have time to run if you're like, catcalling is the worst, and I don't want to think about the time that someone did something really mean to me. In January, I finished this web game that's called SweetXheart, and it's the largest game I've ever made, and it took me about 5 years in total to create. Ooh, a server. Yeah. Advertising. It's the largest game that I've ever made. It took me about 5 years in total, and it was created using JavaScript. So this game, I made it in a program not a program, but a framework that I'm going to talk about a bit later. But I specifically didn't want to use more traditional game engines like Unity or like some of the other ones like Game Maker, because I wanted to be able to actually have it be played on phones and touchscreens, as well as native computers within Chrome. So I very specifically wanted this game to be as accessible as possible, and I had a very fun experience figuring out how to make that happen. So specifically in SweetXheart, one of the things that you're doing is you're experiencing life as a college-age graphic designer, and this person, whose name is Kara, she deals with street harassment and microaggressions. How many of you know what microaggressions are? Okay, cool. That's a good number of people. So if you haven't happened to hear of this word before, microaggressions are basically 1,000 tiny cuts. So Wikipedia describes them as brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. So it's little things that people say to you that make you feel like absolute garbage. So they communicate things that are maybe hostile, derogatory, or negative, kind of prejudiced, and are insulting. Especially for someone like me, who's a woman of color, I've gotten ones that are more gendered, I've gotten ones that are more about race, and some that are just in between. And that's been fun. So I wanted to turn this into a video game, and originally I actually created this game as part of my process of going through grad school. So as you heard, I did some integrated digital media stuff, very specifically at NYU Game Center, or NYU Tandon, and I worked with teachers from NYU Game Center because I was in the same building, and I asked a teacher, hey, would you actually collaborate with me? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to work with you. That sounds really cool. So I spent some time working with this teacher on the initial prototype for this game, and then it turned into something much larger, and I'll talk about that transition as well. Sweet. You okay, guys? I love that there's like 3 of them, and they're like doing the like 3 people, 1 computer thing. I really believe in you all. Can you kind of like get a summary of what's happening, y'all in the audience, though? Okay, cool. That's really what matters to me, and I'll just keep presenting, and we can worry about, like, I'll send all the slides and everything later, so you can listen to me talk, and we'll figure it out as we're going. In this game, you do things like dressing up the main character, you choose from a variety of different clothes and hairstyles, and then she goes out into her world. I wonder what'll happen if I also update or open Keynote. I'm kind of like, I don't know. I want to help so badly. I'm just going to try opening something to see if it can be helpful here at all, or if it's really just, I mean, it seems like it's just a desktop issue that's going on, so I don't really know how to fix that. Right, okay, cool. As long as that's it. I love when I hear that during a breakup. It's not you. Cool. So you dress up your main character, whose name, as I said, was Kara, and then she actually reacts to the clothes that you choose. So Kara, very much like me, if you can't tell already, she wants to look cute. Who doesn't want to look cute? It's like her main MO, so when you make her look cute, she gets really happy. And then she has to actually go outside, and people react to her. So sometimes they say really creepy things to her. Sometimes she's able to get through a day without experiencing harassment, which is a real nice day. And the main mechanic in this game is stress. So as people are interacting with Kara, and as she's getting dressed also, if she feels that she looks really good, then she feels happier and her stress is reduced. And if she interacts with people who harass her, oh, cool. Then she starts to get more frustrated and stressed out. And you want to actually get through 5 days in this game without being stressed out by the end of every day. So that's the goal of this game. And you have to also navigate lots of regular tasks like work and socializing at school. So sometimes your boss at an internship will ask you, can you design this website for me? Can you program this thing for me? And you have to actually do those tasks and then get rated for those tasks. So every little interaction in the game is actually adding up to either a positive week or a negative one. And this is really important to me because it helps me to kind of, I guess, like, come to this point where I accepted my former self. It was a really great retrospective of sorts, and I had a lot of fun thinking about who I was, getting closer to like 10 years ago as we age every single year, oh God. So when I was in college, I was a very stressed out person. I was learning how to become an adult, and I'm such a different person now, but making this game helped me to realize how far away I am from that person that I used to be. So it was a really great chance to just reflect on that, and I really love creative projects for that reason. So it's really uncomfortable, but like people also really like this game. I did not expect this, but it's got a 4.6 rating on the platform where I host it, which is itch.io, and that's like almost 40 people saying that they really like this game. So that's amazing, and like hundreds of people have played it at this point, which again is like whoa. And I've got really great comments, and people are just very nice. Something that I really liked that people have said is it's like a very realistic portrayal of what it's like to be a woman in the United States. So shout outs to Julia Wynn, for example, for this really great quote, which says, "It captured so much: the hustle, pressures, stresses, micro or full-on aggressions, the monotony of daily life for the young millennial black femme character." And another one of my favorite quotes is from a guy, and Stevenson said, "At first I laughed at the animation, then I realized that real women tolerate that BS behavior every day. Suddenly, not funny." And that to me is really awesome because it means that through this web game, I'm actually helping people realize how harmful this stuff can be for people, especially black women specifically, some of whom experience street harassment every day. Very much like me, like I have experienced this stuff a lot. Even before I was a teenager, so I was like 12 years old and people were saying really weird stuff to me. And this happens to people daily, weekly, and it can really start to wear you down. And I will also say that this actually worked. Someone played my game at a recent event and actually came up to me afterward and said, "Wow, I had no idea that this is what women went through. I'm not going to catcall people anymore." And I was like, what? My dream has come true. I did not know that was possible. So literally video games can change everything, and that's amazing. So like, you can make a game and then people will be like, wow, I'll change my behavior, and I did not know that you could do that with this kind of subject, so whoa. So now that you know what this game is like, I'm going to talk about how I built it. And I split this into 3 different phases, so research, design, and code, and I'm going to walk through each one of these. Great. So of course, first I did some research. So I'm a designer. I don't start a project without researching, even when it's about myself. So what I did first is I actually went into Google Calendar because I was really organized also as a post-teen. 19 years old, using Google Calendar, making sure that my calendar reflects my actual college schedule. So I was able to scroll back to 2009 and find it, which was really awesome. And then I looked at old magazine cutouts, which again, I had a mood board before Pinterest got super big, and I would make sure that my aesthetic was curated. If you can't tell, this is like years in the making here. So I found a bunch of old cutouts. I also bought new versions of Teen Vogue because that was the magazine that I looked at back in the day, and I wanted to make sure that I was really getting an understanding of what folks were saying to people who were my age at that point in time, and just to see like what has changed since then. And then I actually found some of my old art. So these are things that I made when I was like 10 or 11, and they're dress-up dolls. And they're actually the reason that I program today. So I actually got into programming because I found this website where you could make dress-up dolls, and it was specifically inspired by things like Sailor Moon and other cartoons from back in the day. So of course I got really into this practice, and I wanted to incorporate as much of that as I could into this game as well, as it's a retrospective of who I am now, or who I was and how I've gotten to be a different person now, rather. And of course, I also went through my old Facebook pictures, so you can tell like I had like a specific mood going on when I was like 19, and so I went through those as well, and I was just kind of like, who was I? Like, who was this confused kid? And again, it just really helped me to like figure out like what the setting was like when I was between the ages of like 19 and like 21. And once I had all these artifacts, I actually switched to design mode. So what I did next is I took my college schedule that you saw earlier, and I split that into specific moments across the morning, afternoon, evening, and nighttime. And then I also tried to categorize them into inside activities, outside activities, as well as sleep. So in this part of the process, I get a lot into documentation and diagramming, so I'm warning you now, you're going to see a lot of squares. And this is something that really helps me to think and break down my work so that I can plan and figure out how I'm going to actually program this stuff. So all of these diagrams actually helped me figure out how to code this game when I got into the programming stage. So once I had that initial breakdown of the average day of me as a college student, what I did is I actually created this initial flow for the game, and this again helped me to figure out the architecture. So it was really figuring out like how does Kara, who is the main character in the game, move throughout her day and like flow throughout experiences with people. So after I had this initial version of this like flow chart, what I did is I simplified it further because I wanted to figure out like how simple I could get, honestly, to make this game function in the way that I wanted it to. And I really also needed to figure out like where would I have dialogue, for example, and where would I have activities, and then how would the activities actually feed back into the dialogue in the game. And this helped me to point out parts that people could click on and drag on, and then parts where people would need to interact with other people in the game potentially. So again, highly recommend diagramming everything and not just jumping into code, because at least for me, it really helps to just kind of draw everything out, and I'm a very visual, systems-oriented person. Great. And then next what I did is I picked out those interactive parts and I started to wireframe them so that I could figure out what I was going to actually need to build within these experiences. So you can kind of see here, there's an initial part where you actually swipe a phone to wake up, which is something that I did literally every day. And I still actually have that alarm screen, and I've been using Android forever. It really hasn't changed. You still swipe to the right, I think it is, to wake up, which is really great. And it really sets the tone for the game. And then you move into dress up, and then once you finish getting dressed, you go outside. And then once you have gotten through some dialogue, you actually pick someone to talk to. And then after the day is over, you come back home. So those are the main interactive parts. And this really hasn't changed much, but there are definitely some places where things get reused, but in a very specific kind of way that I can talk about a little bit more. So once I had actually figured out some layouting things from a simple perspective, I started to think about interaction within a specific part of the game. So this specifically is actually a diagram of the outfit evaluation and how the outfit that you choose actually affects whether or not catcallers respond to you. So there are a couple of different qualities that are attached to each item in your outfit, and I actually have code for this that I'll show you as well. And the specific clothing that you choose can either be cute, it can be like sexually attractive, it can be outlandish, or it can be bland. And if your outfit together with the combined items fits into one of those categories, then people will be either more likely or less likely to actually talk to you. So that's what this actual diagram here expresses. And like, again, I'll share out these slides. It's probably a little bit fuzzy, but I really want to write more about how this game came together, because as you can tell, a lot of work. And then there's also, this is a dialogue tree, so this is an example of like how like the dialogue can kind of branch over the different days in the actual game development process. So this helped me to just figure out like, what did I even need in terms of a dialogue system, and what could support something like this? And I will tell you about the solution that I found, which is really random. Speaking of randomness, randomness is something that I specifically wanted to actually include in this process. Firstly, how many of you play video games? Okay, cool, yeah. So you've probably encountered randomness, and it's probably made a game that you've played more interesting. Randomness increases the amount of times that you can replay a game. It makes games more interesting when used appropriately. You want to figure out how to balance the concept of randomness with the ability to actually have control in the game, because the more that you can have a little bit of both, then there's a sense of variety, and that maybe the outcome will be different if I try something different. So I really think that's important, especially for a smaller game, because I wanted to make sure that people could play it for 30 minutes, but then also maybe spend up to 2 hours playing it if they wanted to. And that's about the approximate time span that you can play this game and get up to 4 or 5 different results in total. So once I'd figured out a lot of the concept of like, how do I inject randomness into this game, I actually started to sketch out dialogue screens. So you can see here, these are 2 screens that actually quite replicate or are quite similar to what actually got included in the game itself. So this is after Kara wakes up, her cat says hello and kind of jumps onto her, and then she takes a shower, and then she moves into the actual dress-up scene. And then something else that I also did is once I'd had those sketches done, I moved into Illustrator with the initial diagrams that I'd created, and I started making art assets for the game itself, which finally led me to coding. Oh my God, it took so long to get here. So as you can see, there's a lot of prep work that goes into creating a game, much like creating a product. Usually you want to figure out the structure and why you're making something before you jump into code. And that, again, is how I also like to make video games, to make sure that I'm creating the most impact in my project. So for this game specifically, as I said, I wanted to make it really accessible, and I needed a game engine, which is a framework or a framework for game development. And I chose Phaser, which is a JavaScript game engine. And I chose it because I didn't want people to have to download a plugin to play this game. And unfortunately, if you want to play a Unity game that you've made, and it's on the web, you actually have to download a plugin first from Chrome, for Chrome at least. And I really also felt like torturing myself, and so I wanted to make sure that I was working directly I wanted to work in Sublime, which is the programming app that I use. So it was really important to me to, again, have this accessibility and to also be able to see how much of a game I could make without actually having to jump into a graphical user interface or a GUI. And Phaser, I mean, it's so far out of all the other game engines that I've tried, it's the best open source one that I've found yet. And that's the other thing that's awesome about it, is it's open source. So you can actually contribute, you can give feedback. It's really helpful. I promise I'm not a shill. I don't know, have any of you actually used Phaser, or like, have you heard about it before? Okay, cool. So we have like some people who have tried it before. So for those of you who have used it before, you may notice that the code looks a little bit different from maybe what you would see in Phaser 3 and above, and that's because I use Phaser version 2.4. And this game is 5 years old, so at some point I just kind of had to quit updating. So that's why you may notice that like maybe there are some features that are added, that have been added since I actually made this game, or started making this game, but at some point I had to just stop updating because I needed to finish it, and it was becoming torturous. So to use Phaser, what you need to do first is make an index.html file, and you include their minified framework. Ooh, how do I do this? Okay, so you can kind of see over there, there's like this little highlighted line, and it says script source phaser.min.js, and that's how you do pretty much anything in JavaScript when it comes to frameworks, so it's quite the same there. And then in the body, what you do is you actually instantiate a Phaser game object. So you want to add your game states and create a container element for the game, which is where the canvas is actually going to show up when the game is run. So you'll notice that I have a lot of scenes or states here. And states, by the way, if you don't know, or scenes are when you go to, say, like a different area in a game. If you don't want to have everything collapsed into a single file, you need to figure out how to cut it up. So again, it's very much like if you do web development, you maybe don't want to have every CSS file in the same exact or every single rule when it comes to CSS in the same file. Maybe you want to split things up by tables, etc. So with this game, I wanted to make sure that when Kara went to school, she was in the school scene, and when Kara went home, she was in the home scene, so that I could organize everything in a way that did not make my mind implode. So I split every single part of this game into a different scene because it made it easier for me to manage it. And a single scene looked like what you can see here. So this scene specifically was just dialogue. So there is an update or a preload space, a function. There's a create function, an update function, and I created the continue function because I wanted a way to go to the next scene. So the way that games work is you have a function where you create everything. So you load all the items into the game, or you make the sprites, for example, and then you want to actually update them. And that's how games work, is that the update function keeps running over and over again. So that's where you would put things like, hey, if you press the down button, the sprite should move down. And so I extended that into a more intense experience, and I'm happy to share a bit more. I have actually done some collaborations with CodePen, for example, to actually talk about making a very simple version of this game. So this is, or a simple version of games in general, but this is an extreme use case for sure. So hopefully you find some value in seeing how I made it. Awesome. So I'm going to talk specifically about 4 of the main mechanics that I included in this game. So I'm going to talk about the dress up part, which of course, love it. I'm going to talk about the commute, which is when Kara walks to school, or rather goes to the train to go to school, or to the office. And then I'm also going to talk about choosing a conversation partner, which again is after Kara does an activity, is the activity good or bad, or is the result good or bad? And dialogue itself, which is again one of the most important parts of the game. So as I said, these mechanics are reused throughout the game, and that's because well, it was easy for me, but it also is something that I realized later on through feedback made the game more fun. So reusing parts of the dress-up component, for example, and making it so that people could drag and drop things to different sprites to actually make a web design was really a great extension of what the dress-up originally was, and made people feel like they actually had more control in the game, which I thought was interesting. So figuring out how to balance the concept of this interactive dialogue portion with actually having activities for folks is something I struggled with a lot. So reusing different components meant that I could have a familiar setting that people were used to, while also giving them new content that they found more valuable. So that's a little bit about why reusing is great. So firstly, dress up. So here is the original wireframe as I showed you. And I personally love to write pseudocode before I actually jump in. So an example of the pseudocode I wrote for this was, when I drag an item, if the item collides with Kara's body, position it on Kara's body correctly. If I have a full outfit, show the continue button. So what that looks like in the actual code. So first I create a base character sprite, which includes her clothes, or it includes her positioning and stuff like that, and then I created her clothes. So every single item, so there's hair, there's tops, which can be shirts, there's bottoms, which can be dress or skirts, and pants and shorts. And there's also shoes, of course, because we don't go outside without shoes. I did not include socks because that was getting really complicated. So every item has statistics. So you can kind of see here, for the hair, there's is the hair cute? Is it more sexy? Is it more outlandish? And then bland is not included because if it doesn't fit into one of those 3, then I counted it as a bland item. So that was removing one thing I had to do from the list of tasks in my head, which was helpful. And this is actually how all the items get added up later. So depending on how everything is evaluated, you may have a cute outfit, or you may have something else that's maybe not as great for Kara. And at the end of the item creation code, what I would do next is apply physics and input events to each item using a for each. So it looks through everything that's in this clothing group, and then it applies physics and input events that let the items be draggable, clickable, or hoverable. And it also makes it so that using physics, the items can be collided with other objects, which means that I can check to see if items are overlapping with other items. So physics in games is really important, and when game developers talk about physics, sometimes they're referring to simple things like, do these items overlap? And sometimes they're actually referring to, if I throw this item in the air, can it fall down? When I'm talking about this game specifically, I only used physics to check for overlaps because I didn't have a lot of side-scrolling or platforming or anything like that. So you'll note the line here that I circled in pink. There's a function that I'm going to show you below that's called drop clothing, and this is the most important part. So when I actually click on an item, I can drag it, and then when I stop holding the item, then the function drop clothing runs. And when an item is dropped, it checks if there's an overlap between the item and the player, as I said. And if there is a collision, then the item's positioned on top of the player using a function called wear clothing. And in wear clothing, or rather, the item is added to the player's outfit object. So hopefully that's like kind of legible. Y'all can see it? Okay, cool. Words. So that's like generally how an outfit actually gets created. And I do this very rudimentary check, which I'm sure I could have written better, which is what I say about everything in this. Started 5 years ago, now we're here. So when the outfit is actually complete, which I do by checking, does she have a hat? Or does she have a top? Does she have a bottom? Does she have shoes? And she always has hair because there's a million different hair options, but like she never doesn't have hair on. So when those three items are combined together in this outfit object, then it calculates the values together. And here's what that looks like. So looks super cute, great outfit, and she actually ends up liking this outfit because it's adorable. Wow, who doesn't want to hack and vote? Next is the commute. So this is what it looked like originally, and when I click a direction button, Kara should move in that direction. If a cat caller notices Kara, the cat caller should speak to Kara, so that's the pseudocode. So first I drew the actual map objects, including the anchors that the character would move to. Then I drew some more objects, including the houses and the player and the direction button, which is like how you can actually move Kara in this, because again, I wanted to make sure that this game could be 100% clickable because it would then also work with touchscreens. So that was a really important part of this for me, was figuring out how can I have all this interaction without having to rely on a keyboard or something like that. So the player also, by the way, has its own function because I have to redraw the outfit that she's wearing at every point in this game. And this was hard, but yeah, like the easiest way was to capture the outfit information and then just redraw it every time. So she has her own function because I'm not copying that stuff over and over again. And this is how it shows up on the screen. So next, I actually start creating the cat callers, give them a random location, and there are 20 different cat callers in the game. So they each have their own trigger number, which is what I called it for some reason at the time. But this number actually is assigned to both their dialogue and their actual art. So that's how you get the different arts. And that makes this guy show up. Hi, dude. And then next, I enable the player to actually be moved around when you click on the actual direction button. And then when the player is done walking, I check their location. And this is actually what causes the catcalling to happen. So if the player is on a spot in front of a catcaller, and the catcaller actually successfully is triggered, if that makes sense, then the catcaller is activated, and they show this exclamation, and the player is like, ugh. And so that looks like this. And this was so fun to make. And then the catcaller, after this whole animation is done, some dialogue gets shown, and I'm going to talk about that very shortly. This also works in different situations, so night and day. And as I said, it works with random cat callers. So you can see that the person who's speaking is the same person as is shown on the actual map, which is hard. And next, so the third mechanic is choosing a conversation partner. So this one's really simple, which is nice for me. So this was the drawing, as I said. And the situation is when Kara selects a person, depending on the quality of her work, the person should react appropriately. And this is modeled, as I said, after the evaluation code for outfits, and it's actually been extended into its own mechanics. So this is one of those situations where I got feedback from people, and they said, hey, I actually want to be able to do more in this game. And I was like, I think I can make that happen in like 7 hours. So after you've dragged and dropped code into functions, so each one of these has like a little description, very similar to creating an outfit. So once the quote-unquote outfits are done, you can press the continue button. And then Kara evaluates your work and says, oh, this was okay, this was really good. This is really good code. This code barely works. And then once you have that evaluation, you have to pick someone to show it to. So first I draw the characters on the screen, and I enable them to each be clicked or selected. And on click, the coworker is actually chosen. So this is what it looks like in the game when you actually have to pick someone to talk to. I really loved coming up with programmer stereotypes. It was very, very fun. And I also it was a really nice time to reflect on people I'd worked with in the past. So that was another part of this experience, which was really great, is just thinking about who are some really great people I worked with and who are people I never want to work with again, and how can I put them into this game without dragging them. All the objects. So once you actually choose someone to talk to, all the objects are immediately destroyed, and then the next state starts. So I think at the bottom of this, there's like a whole little continue section or something, and it says this.state.start, and then it moves to the next one. And that's how every single state works. And then there's some dialogue that happens. So in the next state, it's really, really simple. It runs a dialogue, and it basically preloads the dialogue, and then it says, hey, you should start using that dialogue. So here's the part that matters most. I show the dialogue based on the person who's been picked, the day of the week, because that's really important. There are 5 days in total, so I had to keep track of all of those, and the rating of the actual work done. And this is pretty much how every dialogue-only state works. I definitely, again, acknowledge that I probably could have written this better, but for some reason my brain wanted to split this all out like this. And here's what that looked like. So Kara asks, hey, can you look at this okay code? And then Bobby hates it, because Bobby's trash. It's fine. And then finally, there is dialogue. So this was the hardest part of making this game. I spent a lot of time writing out the characters, figuring out how the days were going to flow, and then I had to figure out how to actually build this into a game. So before I showed you this giant dialogue tree, I took that and I took these Google Docs and I tried to figure out, how am I going to make this thing work? Also, it has to work with JSON. So there is not, as far as I know, if anyone knows of a graphical user interface that just straight up exports to JSON that writes dialogue, talk to me. But I defaulted to Google Sheets, and I was kind of like, is there a Google Sheets add-on or something that I can use? And it turns out there is. Wow! So there's this add-on that's called Export Sheet Data, and I had to be the person to try it out because, I don't know, I like torturing myself. It seems fun. So I have over 150 of these spreadsheets that are full of dialogue. So each column has a different set of information that I export out, and each row is a different line. So it has an identifier, it has things like the actual dialogue, it has what happens after the dialogue is finished, and you click continue. It also has things like, is stress added or removed? So that's a really important part of this game. So as an example, here's kind of how the dialogue tree worked in the Google Sheets, and I tried to kind of include the actual ID so you can understand how that works, as well as the actual like button stuff that I mentioned before. So each line of dialogue, as I said, has its own identifier, and I have to make sure that the identifiers are not the same. So basically, like 1 can go to the left and it could go to 2, or it could go to the right and it can go to 6. And so 1 can link to 2 or 6, and then 2 can keep going down and go to 3. Maybe 3 goes to 4 or 5, and then both of those link to the next page. And then going back to number 6, maybe it goes straight to number 7, and you can see there's like a stress add or remove for number 3 and 7, and then that goes to the next page. So that's like the mental model I had while I was programming the dialogue in Google Sheets. So here's what the Illustrator image looked like. And the actual pseudocode for building this dialogue system out, again, I don't recommend building things from scratch when you don't have to, but I don't know, it seemed fun and I had the time. So when the dialogue text is loaded, run through one line at a time and stop at the end of each line. And then if the player clicks the continue button and there's more dialogue, then you should actually show the next dialogue. So what I did with that pseudocode is I go into export sheet data, I export everything out from Google Sheets, and it creates a JSON file, which is soups amazing. And then all my JSON files are preloaded at the beginning of the actual game, along with everything else in it. And I have this giant function that's called show dialogue. It runs through each line of dialogue from the spreadsheet in order and stops at the end of each line. And in this function, it checks for lots of things, including images, speaker, sound, type of dialogue, stress level, etc. And as I said, there's an ID attached to each one. And for a nice effect, I actually also, once the dialogue has been prepared, I actually display each letter one at a time, because it really makes the game feel more engaging than just having like the full line show up at one at a time. And that's what it looks like with all that stuff included. So kind of like going to the arcade, playing DDR, feeling bad about yourself because your friends are better than you. It's cool. And then you can use this for a variety of effects. So for example, there's a situation where Kara's like, hey, why does this guy keep saying weird stuff to me? And you can have multiple options. You can have 2 options, you can have 3, and the way that I got that to work is by including, like if you include 2 continue buttons, then it'll show 2 different options. If you add a 3rd continue button, it'll show 3. So it was really, really versatile and didn't take a lot of additional work. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about some lessons that I learned in my 5 years of making this project. So firstly, test early and often. I started getting feedback super early from the teacher that I was collaborating with. But as soon as I realized this was going to become a monster, I actually started getting feedback from people very often. So I would send out Google Forms where I would link this game, which again was the convenient part of this game being available online. And I would have people fill this form out and just tell me what they thought of it and if anything felt useful or useless. And that really helped me to also, I'll say that it helped me to keep making the project better, but there were times where I was thinking about quitting, and it actually kept me engaged. So feedback is really great, and you should get it all the time. Secondly, get organized. Definitely organize yourself. So as I said, I'm super organized. This was really beneficial. I'm happy that I did this in the past, and I'm really thankful for myself now. The same applies for every other part of making this game. So documenting things, using Trello, for example, and just really making sure that I organized the way that I was thinking about this project helped me to finish it and not spend another 5 years on it. And I also, as I said, I valued creating a really organized file system that worked for me personally. It helped me to make sure that I could find things wherever they were. And I also commented on everything because, I mean, after the first year, I don't remember what I wrote or why I wrote it. And if I hadn't had those comments, then I probably would have just deleted the entire game. So I definitely recommend just being really organized where you can and trying to think about how you might benefit in the future. And then number 3, ask for help. Recognize your weaknesses. So I am an artist, I'm a writer, I'm a programmer, I'm a pretty great designer. I am not a musician, it turns out, and music and sound is really crucial for games. So I did some failed experiments, and then I realized that I really needed to find a musician and pay them, not try to work with them for free. So I opened a Patreon, and people actually helped me to be able to pay a musician, and this is why I was able to make this game feel really polished. Lesson number 4, so I mentioned this, but Phaser was around 2.1 when I started using it, and it got to 2.4, and then I was like, everything keeps breaking, and I need to stop. So definitely stop upgrading at some point in time, because you have to actually finish the game, and if you're concentrating a lot on making sure that your project is on like the newest, coolest thing, you are not going to actually finish. So I think it's really important to just like cut your losses at some point, and you can come back and actually update the infrastructure later at another point in time. But really, you should focus as much as you can on actually getting something out there that people can use. And speaking of chasing newness, know when to call your project done, as I said. There are a lot of extra features that I really, really wanted to add, but honestly, I knew when the game was going to be good enough, and I called it at that point when I felt really proud of it. And I think it's really important to leave on a high note. So I was tired of working on this thing for 5 years. I was super proud of it, and I was just like, let's just do it. If I need to add stuff later, then I will, but I'd rather just worry about that after the game's out and people are playing it. So highly recommend this. And I'm pretty much done, but I wanted to share some resources with y'all. So if you want to get into diagramming the way that I do, SweetXheart is really great, and it's also free, so you should definitely try out that flowcharting process. It really helped me to figure out the architecture, as I said, of my game. If you're interested in Phaser, phaser.io is the website. I highly recommend it. It's straight up just JavaScript, and you can use it with lots of other frameworks. So if you're interested in like the Leap Motion, for example, they have a JavaScript framework for that. If you want to use it with like, I don't know, React, you can do that. It's pretty cool. And export sheet data, you find it through Google Sheets. Wow. Thank you. And if you want to play this game, go play it on itch.io. Thanks for having me.